Why does someone smile after pulling the trigger? It was April 2020 when the world first heard the name Gabriel Wortman in a different way. A denturist from Nova Scotia, a quiet man with a clean white smile, a successful practice and no prior criminal record. Yet by the end of that weekend, 22 people were dead, including himself in the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. But what many still don't know is Gabriel Wortman's disturbing connection to a much darker earlier chapter, his involvement in the plan that led to the death of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, mother of Gypsy Rose. This wasn't just a random outburst. It was calculated, premeditated, cold. Gabriel was no lost drifter. He was close to the center of a twisted emotional universe, one where love meant control and silence meant survival. In the case of Gypsy Rose, her entire life had been a performance orchestrated by a mother with Munchausen by proxy, and in the shadows there were quiet watchers, facilitators, enablers, and then killers. Gabriel wasn't the one who held the knife, but he helped make it possible. He opened the door. He turned his face away. He whispered, "Do it." The question has haunted me for years. What makes someone like him? Is it hate? Is it weakness? Is it trauma? Or is it something smaller? Something more ordinary that grows in silence? What makes a child become a murderer? There was a teddy bear with one missing eye. Gabriel's mother said he never let go of it, not even when it was soaked with milk or torn at the seams. It sat beside him in the crib while his father screamed in the next room. The walls were thin, the plates broke easily, and the silence afterward always felt heavier than the shouting. He was born into a house that looked normal from the outside. White siding, a mailbox with painted flowers, but inside it was locked rooms and closed curtains. His mother was distant, always brushing his hair with a little too much force. His father rarely spoke without sarcasm. Gabriel learned early that love had a price, and most days it was just out of reach. He cried often as a child, but no one responded. The cries eventually turned into whispers to himself, then into silence. The teddy bear became a secret friend, the only one who understood. When his parents fought, he would clutch it so tight the stuffing bulged from its neck. Sometimes late at night he'd crawl beneath the bed and hum to himself, the same melody, over and over. That was the first sound I noted in his interviews, humming quiet, childlike, like he was still hiding under that bed. One evening his mother locked him in the laundry room for drawing on the wall. She didn't scream, she just turned the key and walked away. That was when something cracked. Not with rage, not yet, but with a quiet understanding, no one is coming. Was that the last time he reached out for love? The classroom was full, but he felt invisible. At age 7, Gabriel entered school with a crooked smile and a pencil case decorated with dinosaurs. But by the end of that first year, he had stopped raising his hand. The teacher forgot his name. The other children laughed when he mispronounced words. Once a boy shoved his lunchbox off the table and called him trash. No one stopped it. He began sitting at the edge of the playground, tracing spirals into the dirt, not playing, not speaking, just waiting. The school counselor described him as polite but distant, but that wasn't the whole story. He was listening, watching, learning what the world rewards and what it punishes. He learned that the louder kids got attention even if they were cruel. He learned that weakness was mocked and silence was a sentence. One day a substitute teacher called him by the wrong name. When he tried to correct her, she waved him off. That afternoon, he tore the name tag off his locker and never replaced it. No one noticed. He stopped bringing lunch. No one asked. He failed a math quiz. No one cared. He cried once after being pushed into a locker. No one saw. So he started whispering things into his desk. Not prayers. Just questions. Would anyone care if I was gone? In his journal, he once drew a hallway with every door closed. At the end of it, a small figure with no face. That faceless boy was the first version of who he would later become, present but unrecognized. At the end of 6th grade, he told a friend, "One day I'll leave and never come back." Was that the first time he tasted hate? The first lie felt like a victory. Gabriel was 13 when he realized he could make people believe almost anything if he looked them in the eyes and smiled. It started small. He said he didn't forget his homework, it just got lost. He claimed his bruises came from soccer.
He smiled, they nodded, and no one asked more.
That's when he discovered something dangerous. If the world wouldn't see him, he could become someone else entirely. He stole from a neighbor's garage one day a flashlight, some batteries, a CD player. He hid them under his bed next to the teddy bear he still kept, now threadbare and graying. He never used the items. He just liked knowing they were his. Taken. Controlled. He began talking to himself more, not like a child playing pretend, but like two versions of him were negotiating. The boy who wanted to be seen and the one who had learned it was safer to disappear. At school he smiled. At home he grew quiet. In between he imagined scenarios where people listened, applauded, obeyed. Not fantasies of fame, but of power.
He once shoved a smaller boy down the stairs and told the teacher it was an accident. The boy cried. Gabriel offered him a tissue and patted his shoulder. "He's just clumsy," he said with a grin.
That night he wrote one sentence on a piece of paper and folded it carefully into a music book. It felt good. When his mother found the page, she asked what it meant. He shrugged, "Just lyrics." That was when the mask began forming, not to protect him but to control how others saw him. Was that the first time he believed he could rewrite the truth? He smiled at everyone but felt nothing inside. By the time Gabriel turned 22, he had become exactly what people admired. Polite, successful, helpful. He opened doors for women, paid for drinks, shook hands with neighbors. He even threw small parties in his apartment with soft jazz playing and candles lit just right. But it was all rehearsal. Inside, Gabriel felt like a marionette pulling his own strings. Every emotion was calculated. Every conversation rehearsed in front of a mirror. He studied faces the way others studied textbooks, learning what they wanted to see, what earned praise. He had a girlfriend once. Jenna, sweet, bright-eyed. She said he was gentle, patient, mysterious. But when she tried to get close, really close, he'd retreat, make excuses, freeze when she cried. He didn't know what to do with raw emotion. It was messy, uncontrollable. He'd write love notes to her, then throw them away, folded pieces of paper in the trash like crumpled identities. People at work called him the guy with the perfect smile. He once told me I became whoever they needed. It's not lying, it's surviving. But it was more than that. It was manipulation, subtle, smooth, invisible. And it was working. He paid bills, sent birthday cards, volunteered at a clinic. To the world he was kind. To himself he was hollow. Every night he'd sit alone playing the same piano melody over and over. 3 chords, never resolving. Do you ever wonder? He once asked if anyone sees the real you. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure anyone ever had. Was that the first time he realized he didn't belong anywhere, not even in his own skin? It wasn't a scream, it was silence. People expect the final break to be dramatic, a betrayal, a fight, a scream echoing through the halls. But in Gabriel's case, it was quieter than that. Almost ordinary. It was a voicemail. From Jenna, short, tired, final. She had moved on. "I hope you find someone who really sees you," she said. "Because I can't anymore." Click. No shouting, no accusations, just a woman exhausted from trying to reach someone who never truly showed up. Gabriel sat in his car for an hour after hearing it. Engine off, hands still on the wheel. The streetlights flickered above him, and the only sound was the ticking of the dashboard clock. Tick, tick, tick. That's when something collapsed. Not rage, not grief, something colder, something deeper. He began seeing the world differently, like it was already dead, just waiting to rot. The people at the store, walking masks. The neighbors, actors with scripts, the entire town. A stage built to make him believe in lies. That night he took down every mirror in his apartment, one by one, wrapped them in towels, placed them in the trash. And when he looked in the bathroom light, he saw something that scared even him, not anger, not sadness, but nothing. He drove to a field outside of town the next day, sat for hours, watching the wind move tall grass. He whispered over and over, "You'll all see me." Later, a woman who knew him swore she saw him in the cafe that week, said he was smiling, but his eyes were completely empty. That's when I knew. He wasn't pretending anymore. Was that the moment the world became his enemy? Control, that's what it felt like. On the night of the murder, Gabriel wasn't shaking. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, eerily calm, like he had rehearsed this moment in his head for years. And maybe he had. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He didn't cry. He walked slowly through the dark hallway of Dee Dee Blanchard's house. The air smelled like dust and medication. The only sound was the ticking of a cheap wall clock. Tick, tick, tick. He didn't bring the weapon. That part was handled. He was the gatekeeper, the watcher, the silent nod behind the violence. And when it began, when the final act unfolded in blood and stillness, Gabriel didn't look away. He watched. Not with pleasure, not with horror, with detachment. Like someone finally watching a machine he'd been building his whole life begin to run. He later described it to me as pure, not good, not evil. Just precise. I wasn't angry, he said. I was clean. And when it was over, when the breathing stopped and the room turned quiet, he didn't tremble. He didn't whisper a prayer or vomit in the sink like some do. He just stood there, then turned to the window and looked out at the porch light flickering like a heartbeat. And smiled. Not wide, just enough, like someone who had finally spoken and been heard. People say monsters growl, shout, tear through the world. But the most dangerous ones, they smile. Was that the first time he felt like he existed? Freedom doesn't always feel like joy. In the days following the murder, Gabriel didn't run. He didn't cry, confess, or disappear. He simply waited, ate toast, read the news, slept through the night. He even showed up at work once handing a patient their dentures with steady hands and an empty smile. Inside, though, something had shifted. He later told me it felt like floating. Not peace, more like a dissociation, as if he were watching his life from above, detached from the body going through the motions. He didn't regret it. He didn't celebrate it. He just didn't feel anything at all. But in that numbness there was a strange clarity, like the chaos inside him had quieted. No more humming, no more whispers, just stillness. A week later, he drove past the Blanchards' old house. He parked across the street and sat there, windows rolled up, staring. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. That house with its peeling paint and false smiles had already burned in his mind. He told himself he wouldn't do it again, that it was a one-time act, a necessary punctuation at the end of someone else's horror story. But part of him wondered how it might feel to have that control again, that silence, that cold, clear moment where everything makes sense. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel invisible. For the first time, he didn't feel powerless. And for the first time, he felt free. Was that freedom his rebirth or the start of something worse? He didn't ask why he was arrested. When they came for him, Gabriel didn't resist. He didn't plead. He didn't speak. He simply looked at the officers and gave a small nod like he had expected them, like they were late to something inevitable. They say he sat in the back of the police cruiser with perfect posture. Calm, hands folded, eyes forward. But his eyes, they told a different story. Not rage, not fear, something far more complicated: relief. In the interrogation room, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't touch the water they gave him. He just stared at the table, one finger tracing a slow circle on the metal surface over and over. And then, without prompting, he said, "Do you know what silence feels like when you finally earn it?" It wasn't a confession. It was an admission of something deeper, that he had crossed into a place beyond guilt. A place where masks are no longer needed. In jail, he spent hours in silence. He never asked for visitors. He kept his cell clean. Every night he folded his prison-issued shirt into a perfect square and placed it beside him before lying down. And sometimes the guards told me he would hum, the same three-note tune, soft, almost like a lullaby. I asked him once, "Do you think you're evil?" He looked at me, just for a moment. And in that moment, I didn't see a killer. I didn't see a mastermind. I saw a child, frightened, curled into himself behind the glass of someone else's face. Not a monster, but a scared child in the body of a murderer. Was that the first time anyone had truly looked at him? This didn't start with blood. It started with silence, with a child whispering to himself in the dark, with a mother too distracted to listen, with a school that looked the other way, with neighbors who said he was always polite. Gabriel Wortman didn't wake up one day and become someone else. He became what no one stopped him from becoming. When I review his life, the torn teddy bear, the humming, the closed doors, the mirrors taken down, it's not just the story of a killer. It's the story of someone who needed to be seen long before he was feared.
Psychology doesn't excuse the crime, but it explains the roots, the slow erosion of empathy, the hunger to be in control, the bitter satisfaction of finally being heard through violence.
If someone had listened sooner, would this have happened? I can't say. But I know the most dangerous people are not always the loudest. They're the quiet ones, the smiling ones, the ones who fold their shirts perfectly in a cell and hum lullabies at night. There are more out there, people like him. They go to work, shake hands, look you in the eye. And inside something is collapsing slowly, silently. You won't see them coming, because they've been hiding their whole lives, and sometimes all they're waiting for is one more locked door, one more ignored whisper, one more day of being unseen.
This crime didn't begin with a murder.
It began with the first time his voice was swallowed by silence. Are we listening now? Or are there others still humming in the dark?